Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for spending some time with me in this video today. And I'm very, very privileged to have Jean Rodrigues and Colleen Jack with me on this conversation. And we thought it might be useful to have a talk about what is the difference between coaching and therapy. Because I think a lot of people out there aren't really sure what the difference is. A lot of people feel that coaching is just a form of therapy. And so we've got two experts today to tell us what the difference is. So Jean, starting with you, what do you feel is the difference between coaching and therapy?
Thank you so much, Melanie, and it's so great to be here with you and Colleen. And I think for me, the most important place to start is really understanding what is coaching and kind of understanding that definition of coaching, which there are a variety of definitions provided by so many different professionals. And really, in a nutshell, understanding that it is about really increasing an individual's life experience in the sense of goal attainment, performance, learning, and that self-directed learning as a whole. And for me, what really stands out is that we have two incredible bodies of coaching, being the Coaches and Mentors of South Africa, COMENSA, as well as the International Coach Federation. And COMENSA really speaks to the definition of an individual increasing their self-awareness. And the International Coach Federation really looks at inspiring that individual's potential. And for me, the most important thing is when you look at an individual or a client from a coaching perspective, is that the individual is creative, whole, and complete, that they really come into that space as that. And when we look at the idea of therapy and coaching and the differences thereof, is that the therapeutic space, again, understanding what type of perspective the individual is coming, the therapist is coming from. If they're coming from a very medical model approach, they are the experts and they have the answers. Whereas kind of the ecosystemic perspective looks at really collaborating with the clients and coming in to that system and becoming part of the system. And so it's very much understanding the whole kind of where the therapist is working at. But from a coaching perspective, it's very much client-centered, and the coach is coming with that partnership of kind of being a sounding board for that individual. So rather than imposing their ideals onto the situation, they're asking powerful questions to ignite the answer within the client.
Okay, those are some awesome insights.
Gives a bit of an idea.
Thank you. Thank you. Colleen?
Yeah, so I love what Gina said already. So some of the definitions for me are that therapy focuses on your past. And so what happened to you as a child, while coaching is focused on the present and the future. So it's future focused. And we are aware from neuroscience that affects the brain state. And so when we look at past events, it's called a negative emotional attractor. It takes us back into the limbic brain. And when we are in a coach process that is positive and it is holding us in the highest regard, and we are focusing on visioning our future, it brings us into the prefrontal cortex of the brain. It's just where I'm touching on my forehead. It's about as big as 5 business cards and as thick. It's a very small space to work with. So excuse me. So it creates new neuronal pathways up into the prefrontal cortex. This is where we do all of our executive processing and good decision making. So good coaching that brings us into this state will create permanent positive brain state changes in the brain. So we literally, because we know the brain is plastic, forming new plasticity into the brain. So coaching has some therapeutic benefit, So you can experience healing in coaching, but it is not based in therapy. And so there is a place for talking therapy, and there is a place for coaching. And the ICF and Commensa are very clear around a coach's function and where to refer back to a professional who will take somebody through their therapy and whatever model is used. So sometimes coaching can be very useful to prepare a person to go into therapy.
Okay.
But the biggest difference is coaching is future focused and present focused and not based on the past.
Okay. So for somebody who's watching this video who would like to do some internal work, how do they know whether they need to find a therapist or whether they need to find a coach? Jean?
So for me, that is very much around, firstly, for the coach, really looking at the ethics of and really abiding by the ethics of the space. And secondly, understanding where the client wants to go, what essentially their goals are, what do they want to achieve. And often what happens is that it's not very clear that in the beginning, maybe there is stuff that comes up that throughout the process that is more therapeutic focused rather than being purely coaching focused. And in that type of situation where the whole thing about coaching really is about do no harm. That's the main premise. And if you know as a coach that this is out of your scope of practice, that is when it's necessary to refer. And as Colleen highlighted, it's important to understand that it's not an either or process, it's an and process. The individual can do coaching and they can do therapy. And that's where the coach and the therapist really become allies in the client's overall healing process. And it's about, because it's working in different areas as a whole, and it's really saying, okay, this is where we can work together in terms of helping you work on specific objectives for your business or really looking at building up your confidence. But in terms of maybe childhood wounds that you need to work through, that's where you're going to work with the therapist. And that's where you become allies in the client's process moving forward.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you. And Colleen?
Yeah, so again, I agree with everything that Jean is saying. So in our code of conduct and the ethics that both RCF and Commensa recommend, that, and specifically RCF are very clear on this, is that if you are going to refer out, that you first contract with your client that you believe this is a process that is beyond your scope as a coach. And they do recommend that you give at least 3 names of professionals. And so you're not simply referring to one person. And then, of course, that you do not get any kickbacks for a referral. I'll be very clear around not accepting any incentive for a referral. And so at least have in your coaching practice a network of professionals that you can guide clients to, whether it is psychologists, psychiatrists, medical practitioners, physiotherapists, biokineticists. All of those work very well within a coaching environment. And as always, the initial relationship will take precedence in terms of the medical will take precedence behind, in front of a coaching relationship. And so Jean's very right. I do work behind psychiatrists and psychologists in my practice, and I will always defer to their principles. And so I'm not sure I've answered your question exactly.
No, I
When
feel
would
you
I
have.
refer out? Yeah,
I feel you have.
I think also in the initial, whether it's a telephonic conversation or an email conversation, one gets a very good sense to trust one's intuition as a coach on whether or not to go into a coaching relationship with somebody. I can tell very quickly the state of mind and also what the contract would be. And so what would the outcomes for that coaching contract be? And that will be often very clear on whether this is a therapeutic engagement or a coaching engagement.
Okay. Okay. Do you ever have people come to you who think they want a coach but actually need a therapist? Does that ever happen, Jean?
Absolutely, and it's so interesting with what Colleen has had to say, and specifically connecting with that is that it's really about really understanding for the clients. It's all about the journey of self-discovery, and it's about observing whether the client can be in a space of creating and generating their own solutions. And often what happens in a therapeutic space is there needs to be a space of kind of potential diagnosis that needs to happen. And specifically in the ethics and agreement part of the conversation, that's when you get a lot of understanding and the client gets a lot of understanding for themselves what the coaching relationship is actually about. So often what happens again is a client realizes, okay, actually, you know, I'm looking for somebody to tell me if something is not right in my life or something is happening with me that is not feeling okay. So again, it's a very empowering process from the beginning because it helps direct the client from the get-go, where they can actually say, you know what, I think I need something more directive, or I need something that's maybe more therapeutic based. And they decide for themselves through the contracting, through the ethics and agreement process as a whole.
Okay.
Yeah, so Jean, it goes back to what is the difference between coaching and therapy? Coaching is a partnership of equality. And so we do not help anyone and we do not advise anyone. The minute you're going into advice or feeling like you're helping, that is a therapeutic experience. And so that is very clear. Coaches do not help anyone. They do not advise people. Because the relationship is one of equality, I'm not a specialist in the room. I might have speciality, but I'm not the highest authority on you in the room. The client is the highest authority. No one knows themselves better than themselves. And so, Jean, you're right in that the minute we start looking for direction, it is a therapeutic exchange.
Okay. Okay, that's very clear. Thank you. Thank you, ladies.
You know, just speaking to that, I think it's so important to also highlight there's so many different modalities. You know, there is the therapeutic space, but then there's counseling, and then there's consulting, and there's training, and there's mentoring. And again, there are slight, but in some instances, very big differences with how that compares to coaching. And, you know, often the space of counseling can be very closely connected to coaching, specifically because it's very short term. It's also goal orientated. But again, the difference comes in where the coach is not the expert, whereas with the counseling space, the counselor is the expert. So in that terms of direction, that's where it's different. And as Colleen was saying, the space of actually when it comes to a space of giving advice or telling what to do, that moves into a space of mentoring. Okay, where mentoring is very much about teaching the individual something, and it comes from the space of training as well, where it's learning a specific set of things that the individual has to do, and it comes from the expert perspective. So there can be a hybrid approach of how the coach works, but again, it's abiding by the body of ethics. And the fundamental premise is the autonomy of the client and doing no harm as a whole.
Okay.
I love that, Jean. And a good coach will know when they are swapping hats and contract that with the client. So we're always going back to the coaching contract. And it's one of the most wonderful things about a coaching relationship is you will always go back to, is the coach coaching to that contract and redefining that contract? And so I may say in a coaching session with somebody, I have information for you. May I swap hats and speak to you more as a mentor? And so it's always yes, no, counter offer. And so maybe they are talking about the clothing industry. I have a lot of experience in the clothing industry. That was my previous career. And so I can say to them, actually, you may not know this, but I do have experience in the clothing industry. May we talk more as a mentor to a mentee?
Okay.
Then we can go for it.
Okay.
It's always contracted.
That makes sense.
And just absolutely. And speaking to that as well, my supervisor is a clinical psychologist as well as a coach, a professional coach. And she was asked when we were on a training together whether she can just move between the psychology space and the coaching space in terms of doing some therapeutic work and then coaching work. And her answer was very clear that it is two different contracts. And if the individual is doing therapy, they're doing therapy. And if the individual is doing coaching, they're doing coaching. And she wouldn't be able to do therapy and coaching with the individual, but rather she would be the client's therapist. And then she would ask somebody else to be the coach. So that's, again, being very aware of boundaries as a whole. And that's in essence what we are providing our clients to really learn about, is that space of boundary management for themselves.
Mm.
And Jean, I'm so thrilled that you brought in the aspect of supervision. And so while supervision is not mandated, as professional coaches, we are in supervision. And what that means is I have a group where I am in peer group supervision with a supervisor, where I will check my own blind spots or sticking points, or if I've got hooked in any way, or if I am unsure of a next step. I will contract it with a client to say, I realize I've got to my threshold here and I would like to take this into supervision if that's okay with you as a client. And a client knows that I'm in supervision. It is upfront in the original session. We speak about the client's resources to recourse if they find that the coaching is not what they wanted. And so supervision is an extraordinary place for a coach to have resources and to check that they are not going into their own issues in a coaching session.
Okay, so Colleen, you're back. Thank you.
Sorry, an international call was coming in. I apologize.
I found it very interesting that we hit a blind spot right at that point in the conversation.
Fascinating. Yeah. So, yeah, I cannot recommend enough a space of supervision as a professional coach.
Okay. Okay.
And that's so true. And I just have to highlight that, because I think one of the biggest almost flaws in the coaching space is that it's not mandatory. And that is where it's also very different looking at it from another perspective. With therapy, it is, it's registered, that's what's supposed to, that is the process. But with coaching, that isn't necessarily the process, where you have to have supervision. And that is so important, because at the end of the day, we are all about making sure that we are again, not being blindsided by the client's stuff, not over-identifying. And we have to have that sounding board where somebody's checking in on our practice all the time. And specifically with the peer supervision, it's so helpful, because you get a variety of different perspectives on the same issue and how different coaches would do things differently. But it is so important that we are constantly held to that agreement of how we're actually working with the clients at hand.
So would you ladies recommend that if somebody is looking for a coach, they make sure before they engage with that coach that coach is in supervision if they are looking for a quality experience? Colleen?
So absolutely, Mel, you have every right to interview a coach or a psychologist. And so I always recommend that you even ask the psychologist, could I call you by your first name? And so that there is some vulnerability in that relationship. So the things that I would recommend is, and Jean has already modeled this, is check that the coach is properly qualified. And one way to do that is ask if they are a member of either Comensa, Coaches and Mentors of Southern Africa, or a body like ICF. There are other various bodies across the world, but the ICF is the largest international coaching federation. And clients are starting to ask, are you a member? But they don't necessarily understand that then coaches have various levels of mastery. And in order to be accredited, a coach would put themselves through being observed by a mentor in coaching sessions, and that those sessions would have been rigorously critiqued. And so a professional coach, in my opinion, has done various forms of coach training, not only one specific training methodology, and that a coach has done their own therapy and their own coaching, that they've been under a coach and a therapist, so that they're very clear around the difference, and that they've also cleared their own patterns of wounding, and that a coach is in supervision. And I know that I am quite conservative and rigorous on my approach as what is a professional coach.
Okay.
And Jean, I think you're going to agree with me.
I'm so happy to have heard you hear that, really, because I think thank goodness, but I think the most important thing to understand is that coaching is not a regulated field. Okay, and that's where the challenge comes. And so the thing is, an individual can become a coach over 2 days. You know, there are so many fly-by-night courses, you know, where it's like, oh, what should I do with my life? Let me become a coach. Let me help people with their lives. But at the end of the day, they haven't gone through the process of really understanding their own baggage. And that can be a whole lifelong journey. So really doing an accredited course, which is not just a weekend, but really moving in depth with going through that dark night of the soul with oneself, and really looking at what is my stuff. So that when you are with an individual, when you are with a client, you know what your triggers are. You know,
and you've walked the path, you've embodied it. You cannot grow anyone if you haven't grown through that process yourself.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. It's I think it is so important for, again, it comes through that space of really providing that client with the client with the empowerment journey of asking the questions, you know, what do they know about coaching? Have they ever had this experience? What comes up for them? So again, it's really making sure the client is informed from the get-go.
Yeah. And most clients come into our practice because they've been referred, it's word of mouth, and inherently there is a trust, because somebody they loved us, they will come into our coaching practice. It's our jobs as professional coaches in that first session to create the structure that says, you are with me, yes, you can trust me, and this is why you can trust me. I'm in supervision, I've done my own personal work, I continue to grow as a coach. This is how I maintain my continued professional and personal development. And I'm okay to let you know that you as a client have recourse if you find that I do not meet the standard that you feel a professional coach should meet.
So what does that recourse look like, Colleen?
They can contact Comensa, the ethics committee, or ICF ethics committee, and I would be called in front of a panel of peers in Comensa and being asked to account. We have had experiences of coaches being reported to Comensa and ICF, and we are getting better as committees to create a little bit more teeth. You know, in the old days, it used to be a slap on the wrist and you can't use the logo any longer, or some remediation. But we are getting better at remediating issues with coaches. But I do agree with Jean, you know, 60 hours of coach training does not make you a coach. It makes you somebody who's received training. It takes a lot more to be calling yourself a professional coach. And certainly as at the coaching levels where people like Jean and I work, we would be laughed out the room with a 62-hour coach training to put us up as qualified. I must also say, and Jean, I'm sure you'll agree with me, the ICF have updated their code of ethics, and I'm thrilled to say that the language is evolving into a more sensitive and inclusive language. And so coaching is evolving. And I hold a space where coaching will be recognized as something that you could deduct off your medical aid. Because we do, when good coaching works, we do create health and sustainability, and it affects the whole system of the organization and into the family, where whole family systems can work better because a partner has received coaching and is trickling that. So we always talk about, you're not coaching the person in the room, you're coaching the system that they're in.
Absolutely.
So we love working systemically. We love affecting the whole family system and the whole organizational system.
Thank you for that. Jean, do you have anything to add on accountability and recourse?
Absolutely. Yes. So also just speaking to what Colleen was saying, just two things to add on to that is that it's all about, whether you are working with systemic coaching on a business model, or whether it's family coaching, it's again moving away from the label of the individual, whereas there is something wrong with you, but moving into the space of there is something that is not working effectively as a system, and let us learn about the language of the system so that we can create that fundamental change. So again, it comes from the family, where they identify something needs to change, as opposed to looking in and saying there's something wrong with this person, this is the label, we need to solve this. So that's where it's an extremely empowering process. And that's where it also, coaching is so expansive, because it doesn't only work on a business model, but it works in the space of self-development and essentially that self-discovery for an individual as a whole. And that is really where the accountability comes from, and why coaching is actually so exciting is because it provides the individual with the ability to account for their actions. So it's not about the coach telling them, okay, this is what you have to do, but it's about the individual for themselves really identifying, okay, this is what I have to do, and I need to make these changes for myself in order to create that shift.
Yeah.
All right, ladies, I notice we are running out of time. So I would just like to add, for anybody who's watching, that I have used a number of different coaching processes over the years, and I can certainly recommend that it's worth investing the time, the money, and the energy in. I certainly wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for the support of the amazing coaches that I've worked with in the past, and Colleen Jack is one of those. So thank you, Colleen, for everything you've enabled me and helped me to unfold for myself.
So it's a partnership.
So just in closing, if there is anybody watching who would like to contact either of you, Jean, where can they find you online?
Thank you so much, Melanie. So they can either find me on my website, which is www.lightupwithin.com, or then drop me an email, jean@lightupwithin.com, or contact me telephonically on 082-570-5726.
Awesome. Colleen?
So just to thank both of you for the privilege, and to meet Jean online and be step for step exactly where professional coaches are. And so it's so wonderful that we can pitch up and have a concise voice together. So yeah, absolutely thrilling that the coaching voice is coming through as professionals. It's easy, just colleen@patternworks.co.za. That's COLLEEN @PATTERNWORKS www.melaniebrummers.co.za.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies.
And I also just have to, sorry, Melanie, I just have to say, I think just thank you so much, Colleen. It's been such a gift to meet you as always. And as Colleen said, I think such a wonderful place to summarize as well is the space of coaching is all about creating that sustainable change. So it doesn't just happen mentally, it happens emotionally, it happens physically. And you know, through Colleen's work of family constellations, it's in the body so much. And I think that's what's so empowering about the coaching space. It's not just a mental space to process information. It works on all levels, which creates a sustainable change and creates those, making the unconscious conscious, which really creates that change.
Lovely.
Thank you for co-creating magic with me today, ladies. I appreciate it so very much.
Awesome.
You.
Thank you. Thank you, Mel.